Picture this. It's 1996 and some guy in Ohio just filled up his car with tap water. Not gasoline, not diesel, literally H2O from his kitchen sink, and drove it 100 miles. The oil companies probably having heart attacks. The government suddenly very interested. The inventor, well, let's just say he ended up face down in a parking lot claiming someone poisoned him.
The top our news here at 6 o'clock, an age-old dream becoming a reality. A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
Meet Stanley Meyer, the man who either cracked the code to unlimited clean energy or pulled off one of the most elaborate automotive hoaxes in history. But here's the kicker, we're still not sure which one it was. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why his story reads like a conspiracy thriller written by someone who clearly failed physics class. Buckle up, because we're about to dive into a tale that has everything: impossible science, government cover-ups, millions of dollars, and a death so suspicious it makes JFK conspiracy theorists look like casual observers. The Water Wizard of Grove City. Stanley Allen Meyer wasn't your typical backyard inventor. This wasn't some guy with a rusty toolbox and a dream. We're talking about a legitimate electrical engineer with over 20 patents to his name. The man knew his way around a circuit board like Gordon Ramsay knows his way around a kitchen. Born in 1940, Meyer grew up in Grove City, Ohio, which is about as middle America as you can get. Think white picket fences, apple pie, and apparently revolutionary automotive technology that defies the laws of physics. His early work included patents for automotive electrical systems, which means he actually understood how cars worked, making his later claims either more credible or more elaborate, depending on who you ask. But here's where Stanley went from normal inventor guy to potential world changer. Somewhere in the late 1980s, he became obsessed with the idea of using water as fuel. Not just any water, mind you. He claimed he could take ordinary tap water and turn it into automotive rocket fuel using nothing but electricity and what he called resonance. Now, before you start thinking this sounds reasonable, let me remind you that water is literally the ash of hydrogen. Trying to burn water for fuel is like trying to burn ash for fire. It's already burned, people. But Stanley Meyer didn't get the memo, or maybe he did and just decided to ignore it. But if you think Meyer was just some delusional guy in his garage, wait until you hear about the technology he claimed could change everything. The water fuel cell explained. Meyer's so-called water fuel cell wasn't just dunking a car engine in a swimming pool and hoping for the best. This thing was supposedly a sophisticated piece of technology that used what he called electrical resonance to split water molecules more efficiently than traditional electrolysis. Here's the basic idea. You know how electrolysis works, right? You pass electricity through water and it splits into hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen burns, oxygen helps it burn, and theoretically, you've got combustible fuel. The problem, it takes more energy to split the water than you get back from burning the hydrogen. It's like paying $10 to make $5. Great business model if you're into bankruptcy. But Meyer claimed his resonance technology was different. He said by using specific frequencies and pulse patterns, he could make water molecules vibrate so intensely that they would basically tear themselves apart with minimal energy input. Imagine if you could whisper to a glass of water and it would explode into fuel. That's essentially what he was claiming. His device looked like something out of a mad scientist's laboratory, all tubes and wires and electrical components that hummed with mysterious energy. The water went in one end, got zapped with his special electrical treatment, and came out the other end as hydrogen and oxygen gas that could supposedly power a car engine. The beautiful part about Meyer's explanation was that it sounded just scientific enough to fool people who didn't know better, but just vague enough to avoid anyone actually replicating it. He threw around terms like molecular destabilization and electrical resonance like they were established scientific principles rather than fancy ways of saying magic happens here. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like complete nonsense, but apparently Meyer was convincing enough to get some pretty serious attention. The demo that shocked the world. March 1996. Stanley Meyer rolls up to his demonstration in a modified 1994 Volkswagen Beetle that looks like it came straight out of a steampunk convention. We're talking about a car with more tubes and wires than a hospital ICU, but somehow it was about to make international headlines. The setup was brilliant in its simplicity. Meyer popped the hood, showed the assembled crowd of reporters and investors a contraption that looked like it belonged in Dr. Frankenstein's lab. And then, here's the money shot, he literally poured ordinary tap water into what looked like a fuel tank. But this wasn't just any water. Meyer made a big show of testing it with a conductivity meter to prove it was just regular H2O, not some secret chemical cocktail. He even let skeptical observers bring their own water from home. The man was confident, I'll give him that. Then came the moment that made believers out of skeptics and millionaires out of investors. Meyer climbed into his Beetle, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. He drove around the parking lot, accelerated, decelerated, and performed every automotive maneuver you could imagine, all while his fuel gauge showed he was running on pure water. The reporters went absolutely insane. This wasn't just a guy claiming he had revolutionary technology. This was visual proof that seemingly defied everything we thought we knew about automotive engineering. News stations around the world picked up the story. Man invents water-powered car became the headline that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. But here's what made the demonstration even more impressive. Meyer didn't just show them a car that ran on water. He explained exactly how it worked, using technical jargon that sounded legitimate enough to fool people who didn't have PhDs in physics. He talked about molecular destabilization and electrical resonance with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed in what he was selling. The video of this demonstration still exists on YouTube, and let me tell you, watching it is like witnessing someone claim they can fly and then seemingly doing it. You know something's not right, but you can't quite put your finger on what. Speaking of people who couldn't put their finger on what was wrong, wait until you hear about the government officials who came knocking. Pentagon's interest. When the US Department of Defense starts showing up at your garage wanting to talk business, you know you've either hit the jackpot or stepped into something way bigger than you bargained for. According to Meyer, military officials were practically camping outside his workshop, desperate to get their hands on his water fuel technology. Think about it from the Pentagon's perspective. Armies run on fuel. The US military is one of the largest consumers of petroleum products in the world. If you could power tanks, helicopters, and aircraft carriers with nothing but water, you'd literally revolutionize warfare. No more vulnerable supply lines, no more dependence on foreign oil, no more massive logistics operations just to keep vehicles running. Meyer claimed that military representatives offered him contracts worth millions of dollars, wanting to weaponize his technology for battlefield applications. But here's where the story gets interesting. Meyer apparently played hard to get. He talked about wanting to help humanity, about freeing the world from oil dependence, about making clean energy available to everyone. Now, call me cynical, but when someone claims the Pentagon is throwing money at them and they're turning it down for humanitarian reasons, my bullshit detector starts going off. This is the same military that turned the internet into a weapon and figured out how to make bombs out of everything from uranium to fertilizer. They don't usually take no for an answer. But Meyer stuck to his story. He claimed he was being pressured by government agencies, that men in black suits were following him around, that his phone was tapped. Whether this was paranoid delusion or actual government interest is still debated, but it certainly added an air of legitimacy to his claims. The military angle also perfectly played into Americans' love of conspiracy theories. Here was a small-town inventor taking on big oil and the military-industrial complex, fighting for the little guy against powerful forces that wanted to suppress his world-changing technology. It was David versus Goliath, except David claimed his slingshot could run on water. But if Meyer's technology was so revolutionary, why did every physicist who looked at it start laughing? The science that broke the laws of physics. Here's where we need to have a serious conversation about a little thing called thermodynamics. Basically, the universe's way of saying, nice try, but the laws of physics aren't suggestions. Meyer's water fuel cell didn't just bend the rules of science, it completely ignored them and then asked for seconds. Let's start with the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted from one form to another. This means you can't get more energy out of a system than you put in. It's like trying to lift yourself up by pulling on your own shoelaces. Physics doesn't work that way. Meyer's claim was that his electrical resonance process could split water molecules using less energy than traditional electrolysis, producing hydrogen that would generate more energy when burned than was used to create it. In scientific terms, this is what we call impossible. It's like claiming you can eat one slice of pizza and somehow burn more calories than you consumed. But wait, it gets better. Meyer also claimed his process was so efficient that a single gallon of water could power a car for hundreds of miles. To put this in perspective, a gallon of gasoline contains about 33.7 kilowatt hours of energy. For water to match that, you'd need to extract every bit of energy from the hydrogen bonds and then somehow create additional energy out of thin air. Every physicist who analyzed Meyer's patents found the same thing. Lots of impressive sounding technical jargon, complex diagrams that looked official, and absolutely zero mathematical proof that any of it would work. It was like reading a recipe for unicorn steaks. The instructions were detailed, but the main ingredient didn't exist. The resonance explanation was particularly laughable. Meyer claimed he could make water molecules vibrate at their resonant frequency until they spontaneously broke apart. The problem? Water molecules don't have a single resonant frequency that would cause them to split into hydrogen and oxygen. If they did, every opera singer in the world would be a potential energy source. Dr. Michael Lawton, a respected electrical engineer who analyzed Meyer's patents, put it best. The claims made are impossible to achieve using the methods described, and the circuits shown would not function as claimed. That's scientists speak for this is complete nonsense. But if the science was so obviously flawed, how did Meyer manage to convince so many people to invest their life savings? The investors who bought the dream. Despite the questionable science, Stanley Meyer had something that many legitimate inventors lack: the ability to sell dreams. This man could have convinced a fish to buy water, and apparently he convinced several investors to buy into his impossible technology. Enter the story of the investors who literally bet their fortunes on Meyer's water-powered future. We're talking about people who wrote checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars, all believing they were getting in on the ground floor of the next automotive revolution. The most notable investors were two men who would later become central to Meyer's downfall. They didn't just give Meyer money, they formed partnerships with him, planning to mass-produce water-powered cars and corner the market on clean energy. Imagine being so convinced by someone's pitch that you're ready to quit your day job and become a water fuel mogul. But here's what made Meyer such an effective salesman. He didn't just show them a car that ran on water, he painted a picture of a future where they would be the oil companies. He talked about licensing deals, international patents, and royalty payments that would make them millionaires. He made them feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. Meyer's sales pitch was masterful. He combined just enough technical explanation to sound credible with just enough mystery to maintain intrigue. He'd show potential investors his patents, his test results, his modified car, and then explain how traditional energy companies were trying to suppress his technology. It was the perfect blend of science, conspiracy, and capitalism. The investors ate it up. They saw dollar signs and imagined themselves as the visionaries who got in early on the technology that would change the world. They probably went home and told their wives they were going to be rich, that they discovered the next Thomas Edison, that their children would thank them for being so forward-thinking. What they didn't realize was that they were about to become part of one of the most expensive science lessons in history. Sometimes the most convincing salespeople are the ones who genuinely believe in what they're selling, even when what they're selling is impossible. But as any good investor knows, eventually you have to show returns. And that's exactly when Meyer's house of cards started tumbling down. The court case that exposed the truth. By 1996, those same investors who had dreamed of water-powered wealth were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Where were the mass-produced cars? Where were the licensing deals? Where was any proof that this technology actually worked outside of Meyer's controlled demonstrations? Two of Meyer's biggest investors decided they'd had enough. They took him to court demanding either proof that his water fuel cell worked as advertised or their money back. This wasn't a casual small claims court dispute. We're talking about a serious legal legal battle that would determine whether Meyer was a genius or a fraud. The court case was like a real-life episode of CSI, except instead of solving murders, they were trying to solve the mystery of whether water could actually power a car. The investors brought in expert witnesses, independent engineers, and scientists who had analyzed Meyer's patents and technology. The judge wasn't interested in fancy technical explanations or conspiracy theories about government suppression. He wanted simple, demonstrable proof. Could Meyer's device do what he claimed it could do? Could it split water using less energy than traditional methods? Could it power a car for hundreds of miles on a single gallon of water? The answer, according to the court, was a resounding no. Expert testimony revealed that Meyer's water fuel cell was nothing more than a conventional electrolyzer, a device that splits water into hydrogen and oxygen but uses more energy than it produces. There was no revolutionary resonance technology, no breakthrough in molecular destabilization, no magic that made the laws of physics optional. The court ruled that Meyer's claims were fraudulent and ordered him to pay back his investors. The legal system had officially declared that the man who claimed he could revolutionize transportation was nothing more than a very convincing con artist. But here's the thing about court rulings. They're based on evidence and expert testimony, not on wishful thinking or conspiracy theories. The judge didn't care about Meyer's claims of government suppression or oil company interference. He cared about whether the technology worked, and according to the evidence, it didn't. Meyer's response to the court ruling was predictable. He claimed the legal system was corrupt, that powerful interests had influenced the decision, that he was being persecuted for trying to help humanity. It was the same playbook used by every snake oil salesman who gets caught. Blame the system, claim conspiracy, and never admit you were wrong. But instead of quietly disappearing after his legal defeat, Meyer decided to double down in the most spectacular way possible. The comeback attempt. Most people, after being legally declared a fraud and ordered to pay back investors, would probably disappear quietly and hope everyone forgets about them. But Stanley Meyer wasn't most people. Instead of slinking away with his tail between his legs, he decided to launch the most audacious comeback attempt in the history of questionable science. Meyer's post-court strategy was pure genius from a public relations standpoint. He didn't deny the court ruling, he reframed it. According to Meyer, the legal system had been corrupted by powerful interests who wanted to suppress his revolutionary technology. He painted himself as a martyr for clean energy, a David fighting against the Goliath of big oil and government corruption. He started giving interviews to anyone who would listen, appearing at alternative energy conferences and building a following among conspiracy theorists who believed he was being persecuted for trying to help humanity. Meyer became a folk hero in certain circles, the misunderstood inventor who was too far ahead of his time. But here's where Meyer's comeback strategy got interesting. He claimed he was refining his technology, making it more efficient, getting closer to that elusive goal of perfect water-to-fuel conversion. He talked about new patents, improved designs, and breakthrough discoveries that would vindicate him once and for all. The man was relentless. He appeared on radio shows, gave newspaper interviews, and even started attracting international attention. Foreign investors and governments began reaching out, interested in licensing his technology. Meyer was like a phoenix rising from the ashes of his legal defeat. His message was always the same. Just give me a little more time and I'll prove to the world that water can power our cars. He spoke with the passion of someone who genuinely believed in his vision, even after being legally declared a fraud. It was either admirable dedication or complete delusion, depending on your perspective. The comeback attempt was working. Meyer started attracting new investors, new partnerships, and new opportunities. He was scheduled to demonstrate his improved technology to international investors, potentially securing funding that would allow him to prove his critics wrong once and for all. Everything was falling into place for Meyer's vindication. He had the attention, the investors, and the platform to prove that his water fuel cell was real. All he needed was one successful public demonstration to silence his critics forever. And that's exactly what he was planning to do, until a dinner meeting in March 1998 changed everything. The Last Supper. March 20th, 1998. Cracker Barrel Restaurant, Grove City, Ohio. Stanley Meyer sits down for what would be his final meal. And trust me, this wasn't just any dinner. This was a meeting that would end with him face down in a parking lot, claiming he'd been murdered. Meyer was meeting with two Belgian investors who had traveled all the way to Ohio because they were supposedly interested in funding his water fuel cell technology. These weren't just casual investors. We're talking about people who had the resources to potentially fund large-scale production of Meyer's devices. The meeting started normally enough. Meyer ordered his usual, probably something as all-American as his revolutionary automotive dreams, and began his standard pitch about how his technology was going to change the world. He talked about resonance frequencies, molecular destabilization, and the unlimited potential of water as fuel. But then, according to eyewitness accounts, something went horribly wrong. Meyer suddenly jumped up from the table, his face contorted in pain or panic. He ran outside into the parking lot where he collapsed and began vomiting. His last words, according to witnesses, were, "They poisoned me." The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Stanley Meyer was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death? A brain aneurysm. Just like that, the man who claimed he could revolutionize transportation was gone. Now, here's where the story gets interesting from a conspiracy theory perspective. Meyer didn't just die. He died claiming he'd been murdered, right after meeting with international investors who could have funded his technology. The timing was so suspicious that even skeptics had to admit it seemed convenient. The Belgian investors claimed they had no idea what Meyer was talking about. They said he seemed fine during dinner, that the conversation was normal, and that his sudden collapse was as shocking to them as it was to everyone else. But their story did little to quell the conspiracy theories that immediately began circulating. Meyer's family and supporters immediately claimed he'd been assassinated by powerful interests who couldn't allow his technology to threaten the global energy establishment. They pointed to his final words, the suspicious timing, and the fact that he died right when he was about to make his biggest comeback. And that's when Stanley Meyer transformed from a discredited inventor into something much more powerful, a martyr for the free energy movement.
The conspiracy theories that refuse to die.
Stanley Meyer's death didn't end his story. It transformed him from a questionable inventor into the patron saint of free energy conspiracy theories. Within days of his death, the internet was buzzing with claims that he'd been murdered by big oil, the government, or some shadowy organization that couldn't allow his revolutionary technology to see the light of day. The conspiracy theories were incredibly detailed and surprisingly creative. Some claim that Meyer's death was orchestrated by petroleum companies who stood to lose trillions of dollars if water-powered cars became mainstream. Others suggested that government agencies had him killed because his technology could destabilize the global economy. The most popular theory was that Meyer had been poisoned by agents working for a cabal of energy companies and government officials. They pointed to his final words, the suspicious timing of his death, and the fact that he died right when he was about to demonstrate his improved technology to international investors. But here's what made these conspiracy theories so persistent. They perfectly explained why Meyer's technology never worked in independent testing. It wasn't because the science was flawed, it was because powerful interests were actively suppressing the technology and eliminating anyone who tried to develop it. YouTube became ground zero for Meyer conspiracy theories. Dozens of documentaries appeared, claiming to expose the truth about his death and the suppression of his technology. These videos racked up millions of views, introducing new generations to the story of the man who could have saved the world but was silenced by evil corporations. The conspiracy theories even spawned their own subculture of Meyer truthers who continued trying to replicate his technology. Garage inventors around the world started building their own versions of his water fuel cell, convinced that they could succeed where Meyer had been stopped. What's fascinating is how these conspiracy theories gave Meyer's story a kind of immortality. Instead of being remembered as a discredited inventor who made impossible claims, he became a symbol of the lone genius fighting against corrupt systems. His death transformed him from a potential fraud into a martyr for clean energy. But here's the thing about conspiracy theories. They're often more exciting than the truth, and the truth about Stanley Meyer is actually more interesting than the myths. The real Stanley Meyer. Strip away the conspiracy theories, the impossible claims, and the mysterious death, and you're left with a complex figure who defies easy categorization. He wasn't the evil con artist his critics claim, but he also wasn't the misunderstood genius his supporters believed. Meyer was, by all accounts, a genuinely skilled electrical engineer who understood automotive systems and had legitimate patents to his name. His early work was solid, practical, and demonstrated real technical competence. This wasn't some random guy who decided to build a perpetual motion machine in his garage. This was someone who understood how things worked. But somewhere along the way, Meyer became convinced that he could achieve something that violated the fundamental laws of physics. Maybe it started as a legitimate research project that got out of hand. Maybe he genuinely believed he had discovered something revolutionary, or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing and just got caught up in the excitement and money that his claims generated. The truth is probably more nuanced than either his supporters or critics want to admit. Meyer might have started with genuine scientific curiosity, become convinced by his own early results, and then found himself trapped in a web of claims that became increasingly impossible to prove. His demonstrations were likely a combination of self-deception and showmanship. The car probably did run during his demonstrations, but not because it was powered by water. Most experts believe Meyer used conventional electrolysis to produce small amounts of hydrogen while secretly supplementing the fuel system with traditional gasoline or other combustible materials. What makes Meyer's story tragic is that he might have actually believed in his own invention. The man who claimed he could revolutionize transportation might have been his own biggest victim, convinced by his own demonstrations that he had achieved the impossible. Meyer's personality was perfectly suited to his role as a revolutionary inventor. He was charismatic enough to convince investors, technical enough to sound credible, and passionate enough to believe in his own vision. In a different time or with different technology, he might have actually been the inventor he claimed to be. So what can we learn from the rise and fall of Stanley Meyer? Well, his story tells us something important about human nature and our relationship with impossible dreams of things. The legacy of impossible dreams. The story of Stanley Meyer isn't really about water-powered cars or revolutionary technology. It's about humanity's eternal hunger for the breakthrough that will change everything. We desperately want to believe that somewhere out there, someone is working on the invention that will solve all our problems. Meyer's story perfectly captures this dynamic. He offered something that everyone wanted: unlimited clean energy that would free us from dependence on fossil fuels. It didn't matter that the science was impossible or that the demonstrations were questionable. What mattered was that he was offering hope for a better future. This pattern repeats throughout history. From perpetual motion machines to cold fusion to free energy devices, we're constantly attracted to inventors who promise to revolutionize the world with breakthrough technology. Most of these inventors follow the same playbook: make impossible claims, provide questionable demonstrations, blame suppression when challenged, and attract followers who want to believe. But here's what's fascinating about Meyer's legacy. His story continues to inspire new generations of inventors who are convinced they can succeed where he failed. Garage tinkerers around the world are still trying to build water-powered cars, convinced that Meyer was onto something real. The internet has made Meyer's story more powerful than ever. YouTube videos about his technology rack up millions of views, introducing new audiences to the possibility that conventional science might be wrong about the limits of energy conversion. His story has become a kind of modern mythology, inspiring believers and skeptics in equal measure. Meyer's influence extends beyond just automotive technology. He's become a symbol for anyone who believes that revolutionary breakthroughs are being suppressed by powerful interests. His story is cited by advocates of alternative energy, conspiracy theorists, and anyone who thinks the establishment is holding back progress. What's both inspiring and tragic about Meyer's legacy is that it demonstrates both the power and the danger of believing in impossible dreams. The same passion that drives genuine scientific breakthroughs can also lead people down paths that defy reality and waste enormous amounts of time and money. So what's the final verdict on Stanley Meyer? Was he a fraud, a genius, or something more complicated than either? After diving deep into Stanley Meyer's story, one thing becomes clear: the truth is far more complex and interesting than either his supporters or critics want to admit. Meyer wasn't just a simple con artist bilking investors out of their money, but he also wasn't the misunderstood genius his followers believe he was. He was something more human and more tragic, a talented inventor who became convinced he could achieve the impossible, got caught up in his own hype, and ultimately paid the price for promising more than he could deliver. His death wasn't the result of a vast conspiracy. It was the result of a very human story about ambition, delusion, and the dangerous intersection of science and wishful thinking. But here's what makes Meyer's story enduringly fascinating. It perfectly captures our relationship with revolutionary technology. We want to believe that breakthrough innovations are possible, that someone out there is working on the invention that will change everything. Meyer offered that hope even if he couldn't deliver on it. The water-powered car remains a holy grail for inventors and conspiracy theorists alike. New versions of Meyer's technology appear on the internet regularly, each claiming to have solved the problems that defeated him. The dream of unlimited clean energy continues to inspire people who are convinced that conventional science is missing something important. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. The same passion that made people believe in Meyer's impossible water-powered car also drives legitimate research into alternative energy, electric vehicles, and sustainable transportation. Sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from people who refuse to accept that something is impossible. The real lesson of Stanley Meyer's story isn't that we should stop believing in revolutionary technology, it's that we should be smarter about how we evaluate extraordinary claims. Revolutionary breakthroughs do happen, but they follow the laws of physics and can be independently verified. So what do you think? Was Stanley Meyer a brilliant inventor who died before he could prove his critics wrong, or was he a talented engineer who got lost in his own impossible dreams? And more importantly, what does his story tell us about our relationship with breakthrough technology? I want to hear your theories in the comments below. Are you team Meyer was murdered by big oil, or team physics doesn't work that way? Maybe you have your own take on what really happened that night at Cracker Barrel. Trust me, after researching this story, I've heard theories that would make conspiracy theorists blush. If you're fascinated by stories about inventors who challenge the impossible, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, we're diving into the guy who claimed he could make cars run on water, and let me tell you, that story gets even weirder than this one.